Hey, good afternoon, everybody. So I had a former student reach out to me for a topic of a video. Dana Weiss, this is for you. Thank you for reaching out. And she asked me to tackle the issue of institutional or systemic racism. Now, I realize my video isn't going to fix this. It's a much bigger problem than that even my ego can solve. And there's people who are a lot smarter and probably a lot more articulate that can solve it and better describe it. So let me give it a shot here. Do I think institutional racism? Do I think it's still a thing? Yeah, it is. I'm just trying to get a good camera angle here because of the sun coming in. Let me just try to do this. There we go. And perfect. Okay. So, do I think it's still a real thing? Yeah, absolutely, I do. Now, a lot of stuff that I want to share with you guys can find on the internet, but let me share a little anecdotal story here. I was at a dinner with some folks, and I won't mention names because I don't want to embarrass anybody, but we were having a conversation, and one of the things that has really bothered me, look, I'm not a pro Biden guy. I'm certainly not a Trump guy. And I'm sitting there and they're talking, and this family's talking about, or these people are talking about Trump. Oh my God, Trump so much better than Hillary Clinton, this, that, the other thing. And somebody had mentioned Ivanka Trump. And this isn't a video to shit on Ivanka Trump, although I could probably do that relatively easily. And I said, yeah, it's really weird because they're violating the law by having her and her son in law as advisors. And they said, oh, what are you talking about? I said, well, there are laws in place that you can't have family members work for you. And how the Trumps worked around that was I think legally they were classified as interns. And that's as far as I'm going to go with that. And I said, well, please pardon my language on this because I'm going to get a little bit heated. But I said, well, what the fuck makes her qualified to be a advisor to the president? And they said, well, she did graduate with a degree in economics. And I said, okay, I teach economics. Should I be an advisor to the president? The only reason why she got the job is because of her daddy, but okay, fine. So later on, we're having a little more dinner and a little more drinks, blah, blah, blah. And something came up about Amazon. And at the time, AOC had said, no, look, we shouldn't bring Amazon to New York because I don't know if you guys know this, but when Amazon moves into a town, they get a whole bunch of perks, including, for example, Jeff Bezos needed his own helicopter pad. Ha ha ha. The guy's a fucking billionaire. He can't afford to buy his own. No, the city's got to pay for it. So AOC and a couple people were like, hey, wait a minute. This affects the city in a whole lot of different ways. Very much like when they built the new Yankee Stadium. The old one was too old, so we got to get all this money from the city to build a new stadium, and they use all this fancy language on how it's a good deal, but really at the end of the day, it's public money for private ventures. And somebody sitting at the table said that AOC, quote unquote, was a fucking idiot. I don't know how she got elected. She should just keep her big mouth shut. And I went, okay, Google. And I looked up. Now, what's interesting is, yes, Ivanka Trump, 39, she did graduate cum laude, or however the hell you say that, with an economics degree. Okay, so she could be the advisor to the president because she has a degree in economics. But AOC should keep her big mouth shut. But it's kind of hard when you have some bragging rights. She came in second in the Intel International Science and Engineering Fair doing a study on antioxidants on certain strands of bacteria, increasing their longevity. Don't quote me on that. She impressed MIT so much that they named an asteroid after her. Now, as far as her education, while in school, she was an intern for Ted Kennedy in the Foreign Affairs Office. She was the main translator for dealing with ICE detentions. Goes to school, graduates, 2 BAs in international relations and economics. So, does institutional racism exist? Yeah, and the thing is, I don't mean to beat up on my Puerto Rican people, but Puerto Rico is a Commonwealth of the United States. They're a part of us. And somebody of a Latina or Latinx, whatever term you want to use, because she makes her voice heard, she should keep her mouth shut. When she's got the same, I'd argue, better pedigree from an educational standpoint than one of the president's top advisors. Not this past congressional class, but the one before, where they were saying, this is the most diverse group of Congress people to be brought in. And that's when the women, they all wore white to show on TV, hey, look, man, we're changing the way that this boys club looks. So you had women of color. And some folks, there was a post going on Facebook, and I don't mean to beat up anybody up about it, but I thought it was the most ignorant, repugnant shit I've ever seen in my life, and I've seen a lot of stuff. 9/11, we said we'd never forget. And we elect these people into our House of Representatives? Oh! Really? Really? Now, somebody's going to say, hey, wait a minute, Polly, this isn't racism, because Islam is a race. It isn't a race. It's a religion. Yeah, but the sentiment is there. Anytime you start to address people as those people, anytime you start to have a divisional line between groups of people, at the end of the day, folks, not to sing Kumbaya, we're all Americans here. And I especially find it funny when Americans who are descendants of other people, and I'm going to get back to that, when they themselves, their family history, they've dealt with racism and bigotry, turn around and go, hey, no, you're not welcome here. So just to give you some fun facts here. Number of House of Representatives, anybody? Bueller, 435. Out of that 435, 37 of those reps identify as being Jewish, either by ancestry or by religion. By the way, 6.9 million Americans identify as being Jewish. As far as Muslims in this country, 3.4 million people identify as being Muslim. They got 3 representatives. And when 2 of them took office, actually the first one being elected in 2006, it was a dude, I don't remember his name, but when Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, when they were elected, people were, I can't believe, oh my God, they're swearing in on the Quran. Who gives a shit? It's all oogie boogie magic anyway. What book? George Carlin's got a great bit about this. When you go to court, they make you swear in on a Bible. But what if it's an upside down, backwards Chinese Braille Bible, and some of the pages are missing? Does it make that oath mean any less? So again, you could go anywhere and find some stuff on this, but let me just hit you with a couple of quick facts here. So when you look at wealth income, when we look at that. African Americans make up 13% of the population. Latinos kind of a close second. It's like 13%, 12%. But wealth amongst African Americans is about 2.6% of the total wealth. Now, how does this happen? Well, if you think about racist policies, okay, when you think of the history of the country, think of the history of the country, and this is a little abstract. And I'm going to keep coming to this. Think of the country as a pond or a lake. And every time there's a racist policy or a policy that disenfranchises groups of people, think of that as a rock, the size of the rock, the impact of the water, the ripples through time. So it may not necessarily be something that was said today. It might have been something from 50 years ago. Look at World War II, for example. World War II, the boys come home. And the government rolls out the GI program. So you go to college, you get a home loan at a cheaper rate than you would get from the banks. Fact of the matter is, African Americans weren't allowed to participate in some of those things. Look at Levitt homes, okay? So the quickest way to build wealth in this country is buying a home because you could borrow lines of equity. It builds up your credit. So the Levitt homes, even John Levitt, if you don't know what a Levitt home is, evidently you haven't taken my class. Basically, you would take what happened with John Levitt. Bought a potato farm, they flattened the earth, and then the construction crews rolled in. They built cookie cutter homes, 2-bedroom, 1-bath homes that were the growth of the suburbs. African Americans were excluded from that. Or when you take redlining, for example, where banks will look at a map of a town, of a city, and designate certain areas as being of a higher value than others. When you look at gerrymandering, where basically politicians are allowed to hire firms where they can basically switch the arrangements on the map to create a voting block or a voting delegate. And what you're able to do is, by shifting where the lines are on a map, continue to disenfranchise people. Do I think institutional racism still exists? Yeah, there's a guy, I'll have to get back to you on his name. He's a representative, I believe, for North Dakota, and he wants to introduce a bill that would allow the term American to apply to race. Here's the thing about race, and I'm fascinated by this. As far as races, a lot of people put a lot of stock in this, but in my sociology class, we go over that. We go over this. Race and ethnicity are two different things. Ethnicity is all the fun, wonderful, music, food, and dance and customs, all that stuff. When we talk about race, at the end of the day, folks, white, black, brown, whatever, we're all human beings. We're all part of the same race. This is why when people in the Ku Klux Klan, they quote the Bible, well, the birds and the fish don't mix. Yeah, but they're different species. Every human, we're all part of the same species. As far as your skin color, that has to do with melanin and your people's ability to use sunlight to create, metabolize vitamin D. That's it. Darker skin's an evolutionary trait. Lighter skin, same deal. My people were friggin' Irish. We're so goddamn light because there's no sun in Ireland. The closer you get to the equator, right, the rays of the sun are more intense, so you need a protection for that. By the way, there's a wonderful video of an old teacher breaking down how even the maps, when you look at the maps that we use in school, how they don't make sense, because like Minnesota is right where the equator would be. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Folks, as far as the races, I'm not trying to be rude, we could break people down into three very vague categories: whitish, blackish, Asian-y. Where are the distinctions? Some features of the eye sockets and some of the bones. That's really it. At the end of the day, we're all related, but yet people still want to make an issue over this. So this congressperson wants to use American as a racial designation, and he says, I'm tired of people hyphenating, Black American, white American. We're all Americans. So on surface, you kind of go, all right, kind of, I guess his heart's in the right place. No. This jabroni turns around and says, black people are happy their ancestors were brought to this country. Yeah, bro. If you've ever seen Roots or the remake of Roots, or if you've ever picked up a book, it's a lot different. As a matter of fact, speaking of books, down in Texas, about 2 years ago, Texas wanted a new history textbook, and they got the textbook, and they bring it home. And a parent just happened to be flipping through the textbook, and it referred to Africans as indentured servants. Indentured servants are different than slaves, because an indentured servant, yes, you were, we'll call it white slavery, but the contract had an expiration date, and at the end of the contract, you might have worked like a dog, but at the end of the term of the contract, you were free, and you also got land out of the deal. Way different than slavery. And slavery, we could spend a year and a day discussing slavery and all the ins and outs on this stuff. We look at employment. African Americans are twice as likely to be unemployed. Again, this comes down to economic policies. Now, let me share a quote with you folks. This is from former President Reagan's campaign advisor. By the way, as you ever see that scene in Fight Club where they're talking about who would you fight in history? I would open up a gargantuan Stone Cold Steve Austin sized can of ass whoop on Ronald Reagan. I think he's a jabroni. I think he's a degenerate. Now, this is a quote from him. Now, I'm not going to use the N word because I'm not, looking for a beating. I'm going to use the word ninja, but I just want you to listen to this, okay? So, in a speech, this was in excuse me one second, just so I can look at the date. So, he starts off by saying, in 1954, by saying ninja, ninja, ninja. You can do that in the 50s. You could run for office, drop in the N-bomb. He goes, by 1968, you can't say ninja. That'll hurt you. It backfires. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that. You're getting so abstract that you're talking about cutting taxes, and all the things you're talking about are technically economic things, and byproduct of them is that blacks get hurt worse than whites. And subsequently, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it gets that abstract, it gets that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? Because obviously sitting around saying we want to cut this is much more abstract, and even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than using the word ninja. Now, you know what word I'm talking about here. So what he's talking about is, he goes, you don't address racial issues anymore. You change your language where you're addressing, oh, this is an economic issue. When we talk about unemployment, well, you got to look at some of the policies. Again, those ripples in the pond, where take Camden, New Jersey, for example. Camden, New Jersey used to have Domino Sugar, used to have Campbell's Soup. Hell, Camden, New Jersey, there's a Rutgers campus there. And the joke amongst people who go to Rutgers is that its real name should be Camden O. Oh, you go there. You can draw specific lines, poverty, crime in a town, to how prosperous a town is. That's a no-brainer. I think I even covered that in another video. That's a simple one. All right. So when you have towns where there's no money, and then you find out that there are, excuse me one second while I pull this up, when you find out that the crime rates are higher, well, that's a no-brainer. Then you get into the prison system in itself. And I'm not, this isn't an anti-cop thing or anything like that, but there are instances that need to be addressed. So if you look at this, 13% of the population identifies as African American. They make up 40% of the prison population. And I've heard people use that, well, you know how those people are. No, in order mathematically to make that our entire prison system, in order to make these numbers fit, you're looking at specific policies. Hell, even look at the issue of bail and bond. I've gotten into a great number of debates on this. I know New York restructured their bail system, and it's been kind of a clusterfuck, if you pardon the language. But in other places like Washington, D.C., for nonviolent crimes, when you look at how the system is in place, judges can set bail at it's at their discretion in many cases. I believe it was Vice did a story about the riots in Baltimore. And there was a teenager, okay, not excusing anybody's bad behavior, kicks out a police window. His bail was $1 million. Who's going to be able to afford that? And then the bail system, the bail bondsmen, they profit off of other people suffering. And it was creating a system of inequality under the law. Because if I got arrested for something, and even if it's two white dudes, just so it's me and Bob over here, we get arrested for the same thing, I could pay for the bail, he can't. Does the law treat us equally? But people are so focused on crime and punishment that they forget this. White teenagers, black teenagers use drugs at the same rate, but yet black teenagers are far more likely to go to jail. There was another story about them. If you ever see that movie, 21 Jump Street, used to be a TV show. Well, those type of undercover stings were a real system. And out in California, in the second, not just safest city in California, the second safest city in the entire country, they were doing these. And what they were targeting were not only special ed kids, but minority kids as well. Because at the end of the day, money buys power. One of the things that you got to talk about when you talk about racism, you got to talk about its nasty cousin, classism. Stop Frisk, New York City. Stop Frisk, New York City, where cops, they'd see somebody, hey, get over here. They run your pockets, all that stuff. It was a violation of Fourth Amendment rights. And somebody, again, I won't mention names because I don't want to embarrass anybody, but somebody was like, hey, look, at the end of the day, if you got nothing to hide, you got nothing to worry about. And I'm explaining like, hey, reasonable search and seizures. Well, what's the reason why you stop them? Because they're wearing Timbs, they're wearing a do-rag? Why don't you take a couple of cops, go over to Wall Street and stop and frisk a couple dudes on Wall Street? They're wearing nice $3,000 suits. Hey, in that briefcase, there could be 2 pounds of cocaine. They could be carrying a gun. I guarantee on Wall Street, there's a little bit of booger sugar. I'm sure some people are taking a little bit of Adderall. They got a little weed. Take a gamble. Let's see what happens. When you looked at the numbers for stop and frisk, those numbers were disproportionately targeted towards African Americans and Latinos. Folks, when I'm talking about racism, look, I'm not talking about comedians making an off-color joke Because to me, if it's humor, it is what it is. Gabriel Iglesias, one of the most non-threatening comedians, right? The big guy, Fluffy, not too big anymore because he started doing DDP yoga. But he's got a voice that he uses when he's talking about white women. Is that racist? Well, technically you are making fun of somebody, but it's meant in good humor. I'm not talking about stuff like that. I'm not talking about the color of Band-Aids. Like I said, my people are pale. A regular Band-Aid ain't going to look, it's still going to pop out. You know what I'm saying? I'm not talking about stuff like that. I'm talking about real things that we can pull statistical data from. So housing. Despite the Fair Housing Act, blacks are shown 18% fewer homes. As a matter of fact, really good podcast you want to take a look at, or a YouTube channel take a look at, Audit the Audit. This is somebody who looks at police interactions, and they just had a video of two African Americans. They were looking at a house. One was the realty agent. The other one was a potential buyer. Across the street, retired sheriff. There's black guys in that house. Calls in the troops. Before even asking any questions, they got the cuffs on them. Oh, they're breaking and entering. He goes, what do you mean I'm breaking and entering? I'm a realtor. I have an appointment to show this house. Here, they start going through pockets, which you're not allowed to do. It's stuff like that where you're automatically making the assumption that because somebody is quote unquote out of place, or they don't belong, or I haven't seen you here before. It's stuff like that you, when you start to add things up, it does make you say, there's something going on here. Was that Bob Dylan that said that? I think so. You look at the number of drivers. Black drivers are 30% more likely to be pulled over. Even in healthcare, one study found that 67% of doctors have a bias against African American patients, and that number even goes up because of African American women, not doctors not paying attention to them. So these things. I'm not saying they're explicitly racist. We all have our intrinsic biases, and we're all, it's not perfection. We're supposed to work on these things. When you have these systems in place, for example, over the summer, you had Black Lives Matter. The first thing people want, all lives matter. Well, you're saying my life doesn't matter because I'm white? No, you're missing the point. When you're looking at the interactions between the police and people of color versus interactions between white folks and the police. Look at what's going on in what happened in the Capitol riot 2 weeks ago, where you're finding off-duty police officers participating in that insurrection. There's some issues there. It takes 8 years of studying to be a lawyer, but 6 months of training to enforce the law. There's issues there. People bring their biases into their workplace. Hell, even in education, we have this. Black students are 3 times more likely than white students to be suspended for the same exact infraction. One of my biggest problems in education, and this isn't a knock at the police, I'm just calling balls and strikes here. One of the biggest problems that we have in education is that discipline of school-based infractions is being turned over to law enforcement. And this isn't a knock at the police. Believe me, so please, I got family members who are police officers. I'm not shitting on the cops. I'm simply saying cops approach things with a cop mentality, whereas a teacher, a social worker, is going to approach things much differently. There was a fight in my school a couple years ago. Nicknamed it the December to Dismember. It was a brawl, and it was all caught on camera. And we're pulling kids apart. We're doing this. Boom, boom, boom. And one of the kids wind up assaulting the SRO. The SRO in question pulled the one line that doesn't work. You need to calm down right now. Well, dude, when you're in a heightened sense of emotion, being told to calm down. Any guy that's had a girlfriend or a wife and she's going off on something, you forgot to take the garbage out, whatever the case may be. Hey, you know what, honey? I think you just need to calm down. Yeah, that's worked ever in history. Little kids, I've seen little kids getting put in handcuffs over things that teachers, principals, administrators, they should be able to handle. There was a video of a kid, I don't remember the ethnicity, but basically it was over a cell phone, and she got ragdolled and tossed like a piece of baggage by American Airlines, by the SRO, because the student wasn't complying. These are major problems. When you look at some of the stuff, a lot of that goes back to the days of, if you've ever seen Lean on Me, the Joe Clark story, where, yeah, there was a point in time in American history where in some schools they were war zones. Same thing with some towns. Dude, out in LA before the riots, they said there were certain neighborhoods the cops just didn't go to because they were outgunned. So they had to change their policies. The problem is we haven't reassessed what's going on in our society to change our views on some of these things. Folks, there's two really good books if you want to read. And I'm going to end it on this. One was one I had to read in college. I forget the author's name, but it's called Whiteness of a Different Color. The other is Renegade History by Thaddeus Stevens. And what this book details, especially with Renegade History, is that for Anglo-Saxon Europeans or Anglo-Saxon white Americans that come here, every group that comes to this country is met with resistance. When the Irish came here, they were met with resistance. Italians, Jews, Germans. There's always this, I don't know, you're those people, okay, and within one generation, so within 20, 25 years, they've been able to assimilate. They've been able to prove their Americanness. African Americans, in particular, at least in this instance, it's a very different story because the ancestry, when we date that back to slavery ends with the ending of the Civil War, passage of a couple of amendments to the Constitution. By the way, Texas didn't comply with that for another 2 years. But then we usher in another 100 years of Jim Crow, where we control every aspect of your life. That still has an impact. When you talk about a school wanting to rename it, or the removal of a Confederate statue, how could you do this? Oh my God, they're destroying history. Why would you have a statue to, let's say, Robert E. Lee, who was a traitor, was a loser, right? Because this is America, we deal with winners, right? According to President Trump. The guy lost. Why would you have a statue to a loser? You don't need a statue to remember history. That's what good history teachers are for. That's what the History Channel's for. But those statues were purposely erected some of them in the 30s, some of them in the 50s, as a reminder, just as an FU to the black community. Just remember your place, because those statues were erected by the Daughters of the Confederacy in many instances. Why would you have a school? Naming the schools is always interesting. Why would you have a school named after a Confederate general, or somebody who's not only a Confederate general, but also somebody who's part of the KKK? That's very bizarre. Would you have the Adolf Hitler elementary school, or would you have the Jeffrey Dahmer school for culinary arts? No, it wouldn't make sense. For some people, it's hard for them to step outside. Look, I see the world through my eyes. I know what it's like to be me. I'm a white heterosexual male. That's how I view the world. I view my world through my view of I guess I'm a historian adjacent. There may be some issues that I'm not aware of. My wife, she's the second smartest person I know. The first being her mother. Her mother's blows me away every time. But bringing up certain issues, hey man, this is what women have to deal with. And me, big dumb guy, like, oh, I never thought, dude, you send a woman to prison, they got to pay for their own tampons. I didn't know that was a thing. So by looking at other people's views, by understanding the history, and it's not erasing history. I hate that. Trump kept saying he goes, after I win my second term, we're going to have a council of history. Basically what they want is they want the yay feel good Disney version of history, a really good book. And this is somebody that got under Trump's skin. Howard Zinn's A People's History of America. It gives you the good, the bad, the ugly. At some point, we elevated ourselves, at least in our minds, in that our country, we're different than everybody else. We don't have any problems. By trying to hide or ignore those problems, doesn't work. You look at the criminal justice system, you look at housing, you look at the economy. Just look at the attitudes of Black Lives Matter, where they turned around and said, oh, I can't believe people are saying this. Well, listen to the message that they're saying. Look at what the statistics are. That's all it is. There's a couple of different things that other avenues we can go down, but I think I've taken up enough of your time. So look, hit me up in the comments, drop some information, some comments, some questions, whatever the case might be. Thanks for watching. If you're new to the channel, please like and subscribe. And as always, I'll see you down the road. Have a good day. Wash your hands. We're still dealing with COVID.